Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. This is the fourth talk in the Joseon History Society Zoom talk series this year. And as you may or may not know, we've established this this talk as a way to facilitate communication and intellectual exchange among scholars and students of interested in Korean history who are in different institutional contexts, both in and outside of the academy. My name is Jeanhyoung, and usually actually the host is Nicholas Marceau, but unfortunately he can't make it today because of work obligations, so I'm standing in for him today. And so today's event is with Dr. Jeanhyoung Soh, who is currently a research fellow at the Institute of Humanities at Seoul National University. She received her PhD also from Seoul National University in 2016, and her research concerns the political and intellectual history of early modern Korea, focusing on political language and rhetoric in the 18th and 19th centuries. Right now, she's working on Jesuit translations of Aristotle's works, and as well as Renaissance maps and their circulation in East Asia. And today's presentation, Cheonha and the reception of Renaissance geography in late Joseon Korea, is a part of that larger research project. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to Dr. Soh.
Thank you, Professor Jeanhyoung, for the introduction and the opportunity to give a talk today. I am Jeanhyoung Soh, a research fellow at Seoul National University. Before my talk, I have to apologize for my Chinese pronunciation in advance. But there are many Chinese names in my presentation, but my Chinese is not good, so so I apologize in advance. Today's my talk is Cheonha and the reception of Renaissance geography in late Joseon period. I'd like to start my talk with a story in a novel titled Taiwanji, which was popular in the late Joseon period. Taiwanji was written in Korean vernacular and translated into Chinese by a literatus named Jo Byung-sun. It was widespread, and even royal family members enjoyed reading it. Here is the story. During the Mongol-controlled Yuan era, there was a man named Im-sung who was born in Nanjing. As a Chinese, he was ashamed of living under barbaric Mongol rule. One day, he met people by chance who felt the same humiliation, and they decided to fight against the barbarian together. Before attempting to overthrow the government, they practiced the divination to find out whether they would win or not. The result of divination was hopeless. The real mandate would last. The divination also warned that anyone who challenged their rule would destroy themselves. Im-sung and his friends despaired. They decided to leave China and go somewhere they could rebuild its civilization. Having boarded a ship in Nanjing, violent seas and high winds were drifting them to the eastern seas until they arrived at deserted island, where they anchored off the coast to find food and water. On the islands, they met monsters such as giants, foxes with 9 tails, and rats that transformed into human beings. They invaded the monsters' territory and were therefore attacked. Im and his company fought against the monsters, killed them, and emptied the islands. After sailing more than 80,000 li from China, Im and his company arrived at the western continents known as Taiwan. When they arrived at Taiwan, they heard the children had been singing a strange prophetic song about how men from the west would be the saviors that would unify the Taiwan continent and civilize the people. After hearing the prophecy, Im and his men began to consider themselves as those men from the West. They then realized that all their sufferings on the journey prepared them to build the civilization in Taiwan and started the conquest war. In a dramatic twist, people from the East turned into the men from the West. In the novel, two ideas of space are combined. First, the dramatic effects. The author used new geographic information. The Earth is globe. Im Sung and his friends kept going east, not west, but they finally arrived at Taiwan, located in the west of China, and constituting the most dramatic scene in the novel. However, the space between China and Taiwan was depicted as full of monsters. The book also described the various monsters islands on Im Sung's route to Taiwan, which reminds of the many islands where extraordinary beings lived as described in Shanhai Jing. This is Shanhai Jing, and they are the monstrous beings in Shanhai Jing. The intermingling of geographic knowledge of European origin with the traditional idea of space based on Shanhai Jing can also be found in the unique Korean maps collectively known as Cheonha-do. On Cheonha-do, sometimes dubbed circular Cheonha-do, which is in Korean 원형 Cheonha-do, the Earth is depicted as round. You can see the round shape of the Earth. Round, not square. And the continents and islands are filled with strange countries, the names of which mostly borrowed from the Shanhai Jing. Cheonha means under heaven, which implies that the scope of the map covers all regions, the known world. The title of map and its content triggered its reader's imagination and circulated widely in Korea from the 17th to 19th centuries. This time frame is significant. Cheonha-do started appearing after the production and circulation of Kunyu Quantu, Wanguo Quantu, including in the Zhifang waiji, and Kunyu Quantu. If you see this, from the 17th and 19th century, at least there were 3 Korean manuscript copies of Kunyu Quantu by Matthew Rich, 10 Korean replicas of Kunyu Quantu by Ferdinand Vervist, 3 copies of world map Kunyu Quantu in Zhifang waiji. These maps are still remaining in Korea, which means that there were more copies in Joseon period. Considering the circulation of new geographic knowledge from such maps in the late Joseon dynasty, Cheonha-do were one way of receiving the new knowledge. This is the replicas of Korean replicas of Kunyu Quantu and replica of Kunyu Quantu, and the replica of Wanguo Quantu. This is another replica of Wanguo Quantu in Yeouji-do. Even though we can consider Cheonha-do as one way of receiving the new knowledge, however, the authors of Cheonha-do were generally anonymous, so it is not easy to interpret their intentions in making such maps. The maps themselves also give us little background information. So these 2 facts lead us to 2 questions. How can we assess the anonymous author's intention? The second one is Cheonha-do a piece of corrupted geographic knowledge or hybrid? Do we regard them as a piece of corrupted geographic knowledge or a hybrid of West and East geographic information? Actually, until now, historians have delineated the apparent features and details of different editions and compare them with other maps of same period, but rarely explain the intellectual map production. A lack of understanding of such context sometimes leads to unwarranted preconceptions and assumptions in the interpretation of maps. If understanding the map's meaning as a piece of corrupted geographic knowledge or interpreting it as a hybrid, but preconception. Instead, tornado must be interpreted under the premise that they were produced not by cartographers, but by intellectuals and painters within a web of beliefs and situated in the late Joseon period. In the 18th and 19th centuries, literati and painters were the main producers and consumers of Korean maps. Governments sent not cartographers, but painters to various areas to draw maps, who were able to make administrative maps without local literates' help. Most of the local literati had no chance to see big maps that had been imported from China. Given these elements, given these elements, sorry about that. Given these elements, we should consider Cheonha as the result of reconstruction of a worldview. In this case, following the introduction of new depiction of world from Western Europe by way of China. To understand this new adjusted world of view, we have to relate the maps to a wide range of text, from literates writing to novels, which elucidate their web of beliefs. It is also noteworthy that Cheonha was rarely independent work, but by the atlases usually named Yeojido. Such atlases generally consist of a Cheonha, this is Cheonha, a map of China. In this case, there is Korea as well, but usually a map of China contains only China. A map of Japan, map of Ryukyu, and several maps of Korea, like provinces. Some of them also contain a narrative on the history of Chinese civilization and information of each country of the atlas. In reconstructing the intellectual context that gave rise to Cheonha, I show how to literates' various writings articulate a desire to know about the countries outside of Chinese tributary system, which was not found before 17th century. I will analyze two cases to show how Korean intellectuals interpreted the incoming maps. Lee Jong-hwe's reading of Kunyu全圖, and Wibekgyu's mistaking Cheonha for Kunyu全圖. I also explain how the hospitality and hostility to countries outside of the Chinese tributary systems were both based on the newly constructed fictional thinking influenced by the incoming geographic knowledge, and then argue that Cheonha reflects both reception of new geographic knowledge as well as an extension of extension of the idea of central Chinese civilization, Zhonghua. In 1719, Japanese translator Amenomori Hoshu was embarrassed when a young Korean diplomat named Shin-Yuhan asked him about monsters while they were talking about geography. Shin-Yuhan was curious whether people from the West looked like a monstrous man as depicted in Shanhai Jing. Amenomori tried to answer Shin's question in a way that would not hurt his feelings. He explained that Dutchies and other people from European countries physically looked like Asians, but only their costumes and languages were different. Shin also asked him about the country of women known to be near Japan. Amenomori responded that there was no country of women No one had ever heard about it for 1,000 and 100 years. After finishing their conversation in writing, Jeanhyoung noted that before the unification of Japan by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, monsters and strange countries had existed around Japan. Jeanhyoung's knowledge on monsters and strange countries mirrored what can be found in Shanhai Jing. Interest in this old text was not rampant among the rational Neo-Confucian intellectuals in Korea before 17th centuries. Until the 16th century, Korean intellectuals rarely even mentioned Shanhai Jing. The attention to the text paralleled with the curiosity about the world beyond the Chinese tributary system. After 1603, not only Chinese language maps produced with the assistance of Jesuit missionaries to China, but also Chinese encyclopedias such as Sanchai Tuhui or Tujubian or Fangyu Shenglu were imported in Korea. And the geographic description found in those texts became the trigger for a new spatial imagination. Zhifang waiji was also an important reference work for these intellectuals. Songho Yi, one of the most famous writers in 18th century Korea, quoted Zhifang waiji many times in geography section of his bestseller encyclopedia Songho Sasol. He lent Zhifang waiji to his students and friends, which suggests that they transcribe Alanese text. Yi even wrote a postface to Zhifang waiji. The title is postface, but it is not real postface. Yi habitually added postface in the title of his book records. In the postface, he argued that Western people traveled all over the world and understood its geography. All the Korean intellectuals did not witness the new geographic information firsthand. They should admit that these incoming maps were made in reasonable ground and evidence. Another intellectual, Lee Ju-kyung, quoted Zhifang waiji extensively. His sources of geographic knowledge were Zhifang waiji and Ferdinand Verbiest, Kunyu waiji. In his enormous work, 오주 연문 장전상고, he quoted Zhifang waiji at least 25 times to explain the countries and continents, the geographic features of the Pacific Ocean, Malacca, Napoli, vegetation, climate, and geographic phenomena such as volcanoes. He expressed the desire to travel around the world after he read books such as Fang Yizhi's Wu Li Shaoshi and Zhifang waiji. A conversation between Yi Bong and Jesuit missionary Ferdinand Augustine von Hallestein in 1761 in the context of a diplomatic mission showcases how Korean literature gained access to Zhifang waiji in the first place. Yi Bong stayed in Beijing as a Korean envoy to China from 1760 to 1761. According to his journal, 국원록, Yi met the Jesuit 3 times at Western Church, 서천주당. Their conversations take the form of written questions and answers, and most of his questions were related to geography, the dimension of the European continent, the number of countries in Europe, the distance between China and Europe, and the European political system. He also learned how to use a celestial globe, 혼천의, and an astrolabe, 간평의, from Hallestein. In turn, Palestine asked Yibong if there were catechisms, scientific books, or maps written, translated, and made by Jesuits in Korea. He answered that Korean Bureau of Astronomy collected dozens of copies of Tianshu Chuhan. The Tianshu Chuhan is the famous Catholic Chinese Catholic liturgical collection of Jesuit writings and included Zhifang waiji. This is Tianshu Chuhan, and this is the Zhifang waiji in the Tianshu Chuhan. Yibong's conversation with Palestine indicates that Tianshu Chuhan was a crucial source for Korean intellectuals to access books related to Western learning, including Zhifang waiji as a source of new geographic knowledge. As a part of exchange, Palestine presented Ferdinand Vervist Kunyu to Yibong, since he kept showing his interest in geography and maps. After Yibong had read Kunyu, he praised Vervist's book, which synthesized all the works of Matteo Ricci, Giulio Alani, Alfonso Bagnoni, and Sabatino de Orsis. He said that Kunyu also included all the eccentric stories from Zhifang waiji. The eccentric elements of Zhifang waiji were the key factors why the book was so widely read and cited in Korea. This is illustrated as well by the fact that Korean intellectuals connected these works of geography to a genre of popular novel. Xu Shizhen, who wrote a short remark on the Zhifang waiji, already indicated as much, stating that the author of Zhifang waiji weaved together eccentric and the foreign, just like a popular novel known as Baiguan novel. Baiguan were low-level officers who collected folk tales, legendary stories, myths, and costumes in different provinces. Baiguan novels were widely read, and writing stories in Baiguan novel style was also popular among Korean literati in the 18th century. The abundant geographic information, including strange costumes, atmospheric phenomena, and different physical attributes of people in different countries, were all exotic, eccentric, and fascinating to Korean literati, which gave them fun and pleasure, as well as a thirst to travel to unknown places. This contextual understanding of Korean literati's interest in works of Renaissance geography produced in China, to some extent, explained the creation of Cheonha, a new type of world map. The Cheonha, almost always a part of an atlas, became common in the 18th and 19th century in Korea. It is a piece of strong circumstantial evidence that the new spatial imaginary constructed after the reception of new geographic knowledge via China became more popular and widely accepted in Korea. Let me now have a more detailed look at how Korean intellectuals approached the incoming maps and worldview. Lee Jong-hee and Rebecca's cases are most illuminating examples. Actually, they were mentioned by many Korean scholars who are dealing with the geography. Not much is known about Lee Jong-hee, and what we do know is based on the collection of his literary work, 수산집, and 동사, History of Korea. Rebecca was a rural intellectual who studied under Yun Bong-gu, a famous conservative scholar in Chungcheong province. Lee Jong-hee and Rebecca were neither famous nor influential in the main academic network of literati centered on the capital Hanyang and its suburbs. They did not know each other personally, but interestingly shared the idea that Maturitz's map originated from Joseon's theory of 9 regions, a connection made by Chinese literati as well. He saw a copy of Kunyu全图and was reminded of Joseon's theory. We Baekgyu saw Cheonha and recalling both Juyeon and Materitz. For these intellectuals, Materitz's map was thus linked to Joseon theories, although they scrutinized the new geographic knowledge in their own ways. Lee Jung-hee read the copy, recording place names and describing the map. Lee Baekgyu read Zhifang waiji and made his own word map. Their cases show how Korean literature received and reconstructed new geographic knowledge. Their ways of receiving also making it possible to access the intellectual context. In 1756, Lee Jung-hee had a chance to see a replica of Kunyu全图in the collection of a certain ex-minister Yi. He borrowed it from the Yi family and read it for 3 days in a row. After reading the map, he wrote a short introduction to and description of map he titled Imadu Nam북ukdo. The text starts by describing Kunyu全图, Asia, Europe, Africa, Magellanica, South America, and North America. According to Lee Jung-hee, China, Central Asia, East, North, and South barbarians consisted of Asia, and it corresponded to the Buddhist continents of Human, Namcheonbuju, Nanshanbujo. He called Asia a place or Jifang, but designated other continents as words, 세계, such as the word of Africa, 아프리카 세계. He then stated that each continent was located in between a small sea and big sea on the richest map, which were equivalent to what Joseon called Bihai. Bihai means small sea, and Inhai means big sea. If you see these two maps, this is part of Kunyu全图of Japanese replica. I use this map because this replica is very clear and high resolution. You can see the small East Sea in here, and there is a big East Sea near Mexico. Those names reminded Lee Jung-hee of Joseon theory of 9 regions. This diagram shows Joseon theory. These squares are the 9 regions, and between 2 regions there is Bihai small seas, and around the Bihai and non-regions there is Inhai. Inhai looks like a ring. So he concluded that the map did not depict the whole world, because in Joseon's theory, there must have been 9 regions, but Richie's map only shows the 6 continents. The basic narrative of his text help us to understand how he interpreted and read the map by drawing on existing resources. The most revealing part of the text is not his conclusion, but his way of reading. In his description of each continent, he chose countries on the continent and wrote down the names. However, as he hardly knew any of countries indicated, he copied just toponyms that were not countries, even though he listed them as such. This is the Allen's list and Yizhong's list of European countries. Allen's Zhifang waiji start with Spain, France, Italy, Germany, Flanders, Poland, Ukraine, the Great Kingdom of Denmark, Greece, Grand Principality of Moscow, islands in the Mediterranean Sea, islands in the Northwestern Sea. But Yizhong's list, he started with Kumania. Kumania is a European steppe where nomadic people lived. He didn't know Kumania is not a state, but a place name. He mentioned Russia and France, but the other places are not the states, like Castile or Creta and Gotland or Iceland. He also assumed that the southern part of Southeast Asia belonged to the southern continent, Magellanica. And he's the first and last person who mentioned Patagonia in Joseon period. He started South America's list with Patagonia, and he mentioned Lima instead of Peru. But in Zhifang waiji, Aleni mentioned Peru at the first state of the South America. Another approach to the incoming worldview is revealed to us by the work of Wibekgyo, the author of Hanyongji. There are 4 versions of Hanyongji, and I compared the first one and the last one. They show the significance of the difference between 2 texts. He's changing ideas as well. Wibekgyo, this work is work of Wibekgyo, the author of Hanyongji. The manuscript version of 1770 shows that Wibekgyo, who did not have a chance to see the replica of Kunyu Wanguo Chuan first mistook a Cheonha-do for rich map. The manuscript includes a Cheonha-do titled Imadu Cheonha-do here. Wibekgyo's linking of Cheonha-do to Matteo-Ricci shows how Cheonha-do could be associated with the missionary by people who did not have chance to see Kunyu Wanguo Chuan or its replica. One thing Wibekgyo's Cheonha-do, the difference of Wibekgyo Cheonha-do is that he showed the word in the rectangular shape, whereas most Cheonha-do are round. There are 2 possible explanations. He might not have accepted the concept that Earth is round, or he might have heard that the rich map was not circular. In any case, it is certain that he did not see any rich map. Unlike Lee Jong-hui, who lived in capital, Wibekgyo was born and lived in Jeanhyoung, which is located in Jeolla province, and was not part of a strong intellectual network. As a result, it took him more time and effort to get access to new information. Later, sometime between 1770 and 1798, Wibekgyo corrected this mistake and inserted different diagrams and text instead of Cheonha-do of Matteo-Ricci in the Hanyongji. The revised version was titled 신편표제 찬도 환영지, which means that newly edited and titled collection of diagrams. I will call this version New Hanyongji after. And this new Hanyongji was printed from wood blocks in 1820 by his grandson. As is evidence from the wood block print, in which the Cheonha-do of Matteo-Ricci is omitted, we had finally read Zhifang waiji and realized that his Cheonha of Materich was in fact not a map produced with the help of Materich. As a replacement for the Cheonha of Materich, he inserted 서양제국도, a map of the countries of the Western Ocean, as well as summary of Zhifang waiji to explain the 5 continents and their climates, vegetation, cultures, and politics and countries. If you see the five continents arrangement in the newly inserted map, the arrangement is very significant. From the right to left, there are Asia, Europe, Africa, America, there's a North America and South America, and here Magellanica. Asia is located on the right, but Eastern Asian countries such as China, Korea, Japan, and BQ are not shown. We also annotated the sketch map by indicating the number of countries on other continents. Only for Asia, these numbers are missing. In short, for we, 서양, namely the West, found in the title of his work, was a broad concept that embraced all the countries except China and its tributary states. In general, it is clear that Wibekyo and Lee Jung-hui received new geographic information enthusiastically. It is unlikely, however, that the Kunyu Wanguo Chuantu and Zhifang waiji changed their perception of space fully. If we just read 서양제국도 and Wibekyo's summary of Zhifang waiji, we may think Wibekyo accepted new knowledge and changed his entire worldview. However, he listed the countries in Shanhai Jing under the category of foreign countries. Moreover, a wider reading of Lee Jung-hui's other works or Wibekyo's other chapters, it appears that their writings related to maps and geographic descriptions are always embedded in a long tradition of thinking about space and deeply related to a cosmology that was prevalent in the late Joseon dynasty, the ample reference to the Shanhai Jing and other ancient books. The structure of Wibekyo's Hanyongji and New Hanyongji followed the typical order found in the East Asian encyclopedias along the 3 categories of heaven, earth, and humankind, 천지인. Wibekyo put the diagrams about all the continents and countries under the earth category. New geographic information, including 서양제국도 map, was also placed in this category. Under humankind, Wibekyo includes chapters with chart and diagrams of the Chinese and Korean historical capitals, stories of Confucian sages, wise men's names, birth and death dates, the Chinese and Korean political systems, local production, products, liturgies, and customs. Preceding all this is an explanation of a cosmological theory known as 원회 윤술, 원회운세 of Xiaoyong, a theory about sequence and quality of time. Why did Wibekyo start his section? This is diagrams of 원회운세 in Hanyongji. Why did Wibekyo start his section on humankind with Xiaoyong's cosmology? Why did he only deal with the Chinese and Korean histories under this category and not those of other parts of the world? Or why did he also discuss Chinese history in the text and not just Korean history? One lead is found in the chart showing the era reign names in Hanyongji. We named Qing, Hu Qing, which means the barbaric Qing. Comparing the information on the Qing with that of previous Ming dynasty, his contempt for the Qing becomes even more evidence. He recorded Ming's emperor's posthumous titles like 장종, 신종, 목종, those kind of posthumous titles, which called 묘호 in Korean. 묘호 is very important Confucian tradition to praise preceding king's virtue. But he omitted all the posthumous titles of Qing emperors. In his new Hanyongji, he removed the character for barbaric coup, but he still did not add posthumous names of the Qing emperors. China for Baekgyu was not the Manchu-ruled Qing emperor, but its Ming predecessors, as well as previous dynasties. After the Ming-Qing transition, Xiaoyong's cosmology circulated widely in Korea. According to Xiaoyong, time had quality that had become corrupted. To hold up the collapse of the world, a king or emperor must locate all the things in their right places. We call it 각득기소. Xiaoyong's cosmological time has a strong spatial dimension and was thought to explain the Manchu invasion of Ming China. The theory predicted the barbarian invasion. When Koreans read the Kunyu 만국全圖 and Zhifang waiji and confronted the existence of hundreds of countries outside of Chinese tributary system, they could not help recalling Xiaoyong's theory. As time progressed, more brutal barbarians arose and threw the world into turmoil. Taken to its logical conclusion, the unknown countries of monstrous beings listed and described on the world map were a potential threat for Korean people. According to the time theory of Xiaoyong, according to the time theory of Xiaoyong, this world was collapsing, although the effort to protect civilization would slow down this process. For Baekgyu, however, the existence of other continents was not a problem in itself, as long as the countries and their people were at their right places. The trouble started when people moved and invaded the center of civilization as Manchu-Qing barbarians had done. He did not need to represent the European map accurately. The only thing he needed was to know the right locations relatively to each other, something the Cheonha 제국도 indicated sufficiently. How did Korean literature overcome what they perceive as barbarian rule and corruption of central civilization caused by Qing? An important thought in China and Korea was the idea of separation between Junhwa and barbarian Yi. The term Junhwa not only denoted civilized, but was also a term for China. After barbarian Manchu had conquered China, many Korean intellectuals regarded Joseon as the last remaining bastion to preserve civilization. For instance, Lee Jong-hui, we already mentioned, he went further than other literati in this regard. He insisted that Qing had lost its legitimacy in occupying the center of civilization, so that Korea was now rightful heir of a Junhwa civilization. To bolster this claim, Lee Jong-hui tried to prove that Korea was civilized and large enough to take on this role. Korea had more than 6,000 years of history. The Korean territory, including Jeju Island, were vast enough to be called Junhwa, as evinced by diversity of its customs and seasons. This map is not by Lee Jong-hui, but by Kim Soo-hong, the famous Andong-Kim family member. The reason why I show you this map is that Kim Song shared the same idea with Lee Jong-hui. If you see the title of this map, the title said 천하 고금 대충 편람도, and here 고금 means past and present. And if you see the map, actually, if you synchronize all the maps, there are the China in China, the Chinese provinces were filled with Confucian literates names who was born those provinces. And here is Joseon, a very strange shape, long shape of Joseon. He depicted Joseon like this because he wanted to show that Joseon is long and big enough to be a center of civilization. And also, in the depiction of Joseon, he described that Joseon's history is as long as Chinese history, because Joseon begins from the Sage King Wuyen time. And what is also interesting is that he mentions Materichi in this map. Actually, this map doesn't seem to relate it to Materichi's map, but he mentioned Materichi. And he called Materichi Minglen, which means Ming Chinese. So through this map, we can guess the Lee Jong-hui's idea of civilization, as Korea is a center of the civilization. By the way, these ideas match the new geography found in Kunyu Wanguo Quantu. The Great Qing was merely one of many states, and China appears smaller and thus less important than previous thought. The incoming geography thus bolsters Lee Jong-hui's own idea of world civilization centered on Korea. While Lee Jong-hui was on one extreme side of Korean intellectual thought by insisting that Korea should be the center of China, other Korean literati were fascinated with the fact that Earth was globe, meaning that the Earth had no center. On this other side of the extreme, there was Hong Dae-yong. Hong Dae-yong's book entitled 의상문답 insisted that China was not the center of the world by depicting the relative location of China. Hong Dae-yong's argument is progressive but deconstructive for the literati who insisted the necessity of Cheonha, a central civilization. For Korean literati in the late Joseon period, a central civilization provided not only a system for relation between states, but also a very basis for law and order in Confucian worldview. However, constructing a worldview with Korea as a center of civilization was practically impossible. Joseon had suffered Qing invasion in the early 17th century and was now a vassal state of Qing China. Older Korean literati did not accept that Qing were rightfully the center of civilization. Their state had recognized the ritual and political overlordship of Qing. The discordance between idea and reality, the predicament that literati faced, drove them to the idea of 소중화, small central civilization, when referring to Joseon. Many of the atlases that were produced in the late Joseon dynasty actually reflect this concept. As I repeatedly said, they consist of 4 parts: a Cheonha world map, a map of China, a map of Japan, a map of Ryukyu, and a map of Korea, both of whole country and 8 provinces. These atlases thus reveal a premise. China, Ryukyu, Japan, and Korea were part of the civilization order originally centered on China. Why we can say that is that all the maps of China in the atlases are Ming China, not Qing China. I tried to find a Qing China map, but I could not find. And I'm sorry. And Cheonha's function in this atlas is as a world map. Yet, although they always functioned as world map, these Cheonha inserted Korean atlases did not all look alike. This Cheonha is a very common one. Common Cheonha, usually the first map in the atlas is entitled Yajido. And this Cheonha, it is also called Cheonha, and this is more look like a modern map we similar to. Actually, it is a copy of Shanhai UD Quantu, Sanheyoji Jeon도. In short, these atlases, in these atlases, Cheonha works as a world map. These Cheonha in atlases thus reflect shifting conceptualization of Korean-China relationship following the Ming-Qing transition. This is confirmed on all depiction of China produced during the Joseon period, which never mention Qing and keep referring to Ming up. Okay, Ming up until 19th century as events by 태서회사 이마도 만국전도, produced by 하백원. This map, despite the title linking it directly to Materitz, is also a copy of a world map of Zhifang waiji. On the map, China and the sea, its east, are labeled 대명해, and nearly 200 years after the fall of Ming Chinese state. It must have been a conscious decision, I believe, as many Korean literati who were also bureaucrats and their families members had been to Qing court as envoys, where they had had the chance to see maps and globes, including at Qing court. As Yeibong, actually he got the present of various Kunyu Tusho. Some of these more of like various Kunyu Chantu and Kunyu Tusho were indeed well known to Korean literati in the late 18th century. And they naturally marked sea as that of Qing, 대청해, the sea of great Qing. Indeed, one important reason why Koreans were able to embrace new geographic knowledge linked to the Jesuit, that this knowledge was regarded as a legacy of Ming, and Materitz as a Ming Chinese, and yeah, those kind of things. The premise underlying these maps thus implied that Chinese civilization was continued by Korea. Although Ming had long since collapsed, tributary system and the order of civilization remained. Let me return to the story from the novel Taiwanji I started this talk with. Im Sung and his friends had reached Taiwan by eliminating the monsters they encountered and on their long journey. After they arrived at Taiwan, they started a war, conquered 5 countries, and unified them. They were qualified to be conquerors since they were inheritors of Chinese civilization. No one questions their legitimacy to to build an empire on Taiwan. After becoming emperor, Imsong instituted a hierarchy, social order, liturgy, and music according to Confucian rule. The new emperor and his friends brought their families to Taiwan, and their lineage lasted more than 1,000 years. Imsong's construction of utopian civilization simultaneously connoted violence and anxiety. Exclusion and discrimination against unknown beings ironically revealed the fear they had. In this talk, I try to share the intellectual context of Cheonha in the context of Korean reception of Renaissance geography by way of China. I showed how new geographic information was weaved with the web of existing beliefs, and how this impacted Korean literature's spatial imaginaries, which finally pushed them to rethink who they were and where they were located. Ming-Qing transition and conquest of China by Manchu resulted in literati rigidly distinguishing the civilized states from the barbaric people that could invade this civilized space. Intellectuals and bureaucrats who had a chance to visit China and meet Jesuits in Beijing were more open to intellectual challenges and new information. They even wrote that there were sages in Europe after reading Euclid's Elements or other astronomy books translated or written by Jesuits. Literati such as Hong Dae-yong even used a new geographic knowledge as a tool to deconstruct the idea of a central Chinese civilization. Others insisted, paradoxically, that Joseon could be the center of civilization because there was no center on the globe anyway. However, such intellectuals were relatively few in number. More local elites and less mobile intellectuals struggled with all this new geographic information. Although they admitted that the world was larger than previously assumed, these Joseon intellectuals shared a common perception of barbaric outside world threatening the central civilization they were part of. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Soh, for the really wonderful and detailed and very rich presentation. I certainly learned a lot from it. I think we have about half an hour for question and answer, but before we do so, we had some requests from the audience regarding your publications. I know you have one coming up very soon, but I think it's in production, right? Is that right? The University of Hawaii chapter.
Oh yeah, it will be a book chapter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'll do now is so there's no link for it yet. So because it's still I think in production, but the title of the book here, I'm going to just copy and paste it. That's okay, right? I'll do that. Okay. Yeah. Edited by Dr. Soh's chapter in it will be titled here. I'm just copying this. Utopia. In the meantime, if the audience has any questions, please use the raise hand button or contact me through the chat function, and I'll get to everyone. Yeah, okay, here we go. So this is a forthcoming chapter. Questions? Okay, we have one from Karen.
So maybe I just want to start with a comment. This is kind of breathtakingly new research, for me at least. I've read a number of purported explanations of the Cheonha Do, but none of them have the ability to analyze its textual context in the way that you've done. And none of them have really connected it with the Richi legacy. So I guess the question is, have I missed something? Is there something in English that's already done this? Or if not, I just want to commend you for this research and ask what your plans are going forward. How soon do we get to see it, other than this chapter that we've just learned is on its way to press from the University of Hawaii? Thank you.
You mean my plan after this chapter, right? Actually, I'm not a historian of geography, and it is I started work by chance with Professor Don Baker. Actually, 2 years ago, we applied for the conference together, and at the time I was I had very small knowledge on this map. So my research started from the 2 years ago. So I'm still not enough. I don't think I have enough knowledge on this field, but I strongly feel that this kind of idea is related to continue to until to the 19th century. So so now I call it like a 200 years of fear of against the outside, because there is a Wijong Choksapa, as you all know, who is very conservative and anti-Westernist and anti-modernism. In Korea, we consider they had lack of knowledge of Western geography or Western systems, but actually they knew it, and this kind of knowledge continued to the 19th century, and descendant of this knowledge, how can I say it, became a Wijong Choksapa. So I'm thinking to write about the 19th century, late 19th century's idea of idea of a worldview, linking to the 18th century ideas of geography and their anxiety and fear against the outside of the world.
Well, I just want to say a lot of us who study early modern East Asian maps came to it late in our intellectual development. A lot of us are, I would say, autodidacts. We've had to learn this on our own. And I think you have a huge contribution to make. So unless Professor Baker has another student who's eager to do this, I really hope you'll keep going. I mean, this is an order of magnitude more sophisticated than some of the work that's been written on these maps. So don't underestimate your contribution. And I'm eager to hear what Alex Aiken has to say too. So I will mute.
Indeed, Alex is next.
Hi there. Well, first I want to echo the comments. Thank you very much for this talk. I was wondering, as I'm sure you know, Gary Ledyard had a different sort of genealogy for the Cheonha Do maps. Basically, that they were derived from copies of the Gangnido from the early 1400s. And I'm one, and partly the Gangnido first depictions of the West was based on Islamic sources that had been imported to China. So first of all, I was wondering whether you had any specific issues with Ledyard's interpretation, which leads you to reject it. I must say, I personally am not entirely convinced by his explanation either. And secondly, it's kind of related to that, the dating of these maps. I mean, usually these atlases don't have any date. Sometimes I've seen claims that they're as early as the 16th century, which would seem to give more credence to Ledyard style interpretation that these were not based on Jesuit sources, but on previous information. but without actual dating, it's just so hard to, they often look a lot older than they are, right? So I'm just curious to hear what you've learned about the age of the earliest maps of this format, what we can tell about that. So I'll mute myself to listen.
But thank you for the questions. I will answer the last one. As I said in the presentation, there is no cartographers in Korea. There is painters and literati who made these maps, which means that these maps are combined with old knowledge and new knowledge together, I think. So if we talk about the map of China or map of Korea and 8 provinces, those maps reflected the old knowledge, the old geographic knowledge in 16th century or 15th century. But the map of Ming China, a map of Ming China and map of Cheonha is quite new one, because I checked the Yeoujido atlases. What I found is that the earliest one is 17th century, and it doesn't contain the Cheonha or map of China or map of Ryukyu or map of Japan. This system, I mean, this type of atlases are quite new. But if we talk about the Korean provinces, they just copy the old ones as well, because they don't need to make a exact Korean maps, because some of them, which were really produced by Korean literates, not by government, they do not even need to mark the correct location of Korean provinces names or place names, or they didn't need to reflect the newly made towns or those kind of changes. So that's why I believe that this type of Cheonha appeared after the 17th century. And the first one is Gangnido. Actually, I don't know about the early Joseon period, but what I know is that until King Seokjong's era, the Joseon literacy seemed not to be interested in the early Joseon period. Even King or Sejong or Taejo, they were not interested in those kings and their works, which means that actually the King Seokjong was the first one who tried to find the early King Sejong's work or Taejong's work or Taejo's heretic can I say work, and represented in his era. So which means that everything represented in early Joseon period is started in Seokjong. And there is no mention about Gangnido in literature's text. That's why I did not link Cheonha with Gangnido. As I said, I am not a historian of geography, so I don't know the geographic linking to maps. But if we talk about the intellectual context and literature's writings, I don't think that it is easy to find the connection between 2 types of maps.
Thank you, and thanks again for the great talk.
So we have a question in the chat, and this is from Professor Olp, and he has 2 questions. The first one is, what is the meaning of kuk or nation in Cheonha? Is it a nation state? And what is the meaning of the imagined 70 nations, including the women's nation in the map? Were they potential threat to Korea and China? Why? second question is, why and how was the Taoist worldview integrated into Confucian and Christian ones? Do you know of other examples of this kind of hybrid product among these three different worldviews?
Okay, thank you for the question, Professor Songde. So the first question, I don't think it's nation state at all. Nation state is a special concept for the modern state. This was so I don't think we call those kind of states or countries as a nation state. And imagine the 7 nations, including women's nations, in the map. I don't know what you mean exactly. You mean the women's nation or the nation or islands in the Cheonha-do or the Zhifang waiji? Can you elaborate the question? Actually, Cheonha-do is only produced.
There are many different kinds of Cheonha-do, but one of the Cheonha-do has around 70 countries unknown to Joseon Koreans at that time. So, and there are some 3 or 4 female countries there. So you mentioned they could become a potential threat to Joseon Korea.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah.
No, they just want, actually in Cheonha-do, why they depicted all the countries from the Shanhai Jing is that they just want to represent that there were many countries outside of Chinese tributary systems. That's what I believe. And they could be potential threat to Korea or China when they invade the Chinese civilization. So it is kind of alarm for them to remember there are many countries outside of Chinese tributary system. That's why I think they put the Cheonha-do on the first page of the atlases. Even there are some Cheonha-do which contain the modern world map together, but actually their depiction of China and Korea and Japan is more like elaborated and developed. I don't want to use that word, but I have to because my English is not good. So developed one, but they put the Cheonha-do, the very ancient version, ancient style of Cheonha-do on the first page of the atlas. So it is kind of ritual for them to put the Cheonha-do on the first page of atlas, I think. And I think they don't think it is Taoist worldview. I don't think so. This confusion in Chinese one. I don't think they, even though Cheonha-do reflect the Taoist worldview, as many historians of geography already said, but I don't think that when they draw the Cheonha-do on the first page of atlas, they did not regard it as a Taoist worldview. It's like a cliche of a word map, I think. And other examples. But I don't. I'm not sure about the hybrid production among these 3 worldviews, but I think that there must be some retrospective writings, of course. For example, Hong Ye-hee's, there is one famous high bureaucrat whose name is Hong Ye-hee in 19th century. Hong Ye wrote cosmological calendar, and he put all the Western astronomy and geometry, and also he put the 상수학, which is Xiaoyong's cosmology together. And those kind of texts exist in 18th century, I think. And I think there are also Catholic converters in the late 18th century and 19th century. So if we consider their writings, we can find those kind of things, I think.
Wonderful. We have more questions. So let's see. Next on the list is Sanjay.
Thank you, Dr. Soh, for fascinating presentation. I have a short but a bit general question about studying the reception of new knowledge, since I know that you are also interested not just in geography, but also other kinds of Western learning or Western knowledge in 19th century as well. So I cannot help but ask, as a PhD candidate who is also studying the reception of Western learning in the late 19th century, if there is any general lesson or tip about your methodological perspective in terms of studying the reception of the Western knowledge. For the students like me, what would that be? I mean, could you teach us about it? I'm sure that, you know, those kinds of lessons are, you know, all reflected in your presentation, but if you could kind of summarize it, that would be really helpful for us, I think. Thank you.
Can I answer your question? As I said, I'm a beginner of this research because I started this research only 2 years ago. So I've read as much as I can, and but you know what I found is that the many historians sometimes they missed the order of Vitruvius' writings. For example, I talked about 이종희's 이마두 남북국도, and many historians of geography mentioned that text, but they did not care about the place names he mentioned, and they did not compare the text with the Zhifang waiji's place names or countries names list. So those kind of missing is sometimes happen. So make the list, making list when you read the literature. Actually, the primary sources is very important to compare. So I found those kind of missing in many ways. For example, Tianju-Shi, for example, I'm working on Tianju-Shi, Cheonju-Shi, Korean vernacular Tianju-Shi, but it is impossible, until now it is impossible to find out the date of Tianju-Shi, Korean vernacular version. But I found that I wrote all the contents list and compared to the other versions of Chinese Tianju-Shi, and I found that there was a page numbers on the vernacular version, which was not reflecting their page numbers. And then I found that those vernacular version match it to the other one. Those kind of finding is important to working with this type of work, because already many scholars working on this field, and their work is so great. So we have to find the gap between the great works, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like a big part of the process is going back to the fundamentals of philology and bibliography, and you can't create new narratives without paying attention to the details, right? At least that's how I understand it. Okay, we have more questions. We have one from Richard and then another in the chat, but go ahead, Richard.
You mentioned earlier that it wasn't until like Sukjeong's reign when scholars sort of took an interest in sort of earlier produced maps, and that got me sort of thinking. A lot of the writings about Cheonha-do or the actual specific maps you presented in your presentation today, they seem to come from a lot of basically private individuals' writings. So have you sort of encountered any sort of difference when it comes to actual maps or talking about geographies in state-produced documents? Do you see a difference? Do they incorporate some of the ideas that you have about the Cheonha-do when it comes to the official state like government discourse? Or do you think this whole Cheonha-do discourse is purely like a wider social phenomenon from the non-state part of society?
Actually, your question is very important to understand Cheonha-do, because as I said in the beginning of my presentation, Cheonha-do was made by anonymous writers, and there is we cannot find any text which reflect their intentions, and government also did not any indications or orders how to make the maps, which means that they only sent the painters to the regions, provinces, and the painters they worked with the literatures in the provinces. So it is all I mentioned, all the text and primary sources I mentioned it is like a circumstantial evidences, because I could not help reconstructing the intellectual context with those kind of evidence, because there is no one single primary source to talking about this kind of things. So but if you see the Cheonha-do, there are so many Cheonha-do and Yeoji-do were made in late Joseon period. If you find there are so many Cheonha-do in many museums in Korea, and also it is also sold in Japanese auction these days and European auction as well, which means that there are so many Cheonha-do exist until now, which means that Cheonha-do and its atlases was kind of social phenomena. We can consider it as like that.
All right, we have another set of questions from the audience in the chat from Jeanhyoung Soh. Did the Cheonha-do spark interest in foreign learning among Joseon intellectuals and foreign trade among Joseon merchants? And second, if yes, do you think it paved the foundation for Pukak, northern learning?
I don't think so. I don't believe that the northern learning is not related to the Cheonha-do at all. The people who we consider the scholars of northern learning, they were really well knew about the Western geographic informations. This means that they could make even globe, or they made their own. They can represent or made replica of the Western maps. They did not need to make a Cheonha-do for their worldview. And I don't think Cheonha-do sparked the interest in foreign learning among Joseon intellectuals, but Cheonha-do was a result of the receiving one way of receiving the foreign learning. I think.
All right. Okay, so we have about 4 more minutes left in the officially scheduled time. So if you have some questions, maybe we can type them all in the chat and then have Dr. Soh respond to them this is your opportunity. If there isn't one, I wonder if Dr. Soh can tell us a little bit more about her other research projects. I know we mentioned them. I mean, I know you mentioned you were working on translations of Aristotle and other texts and Renaissance knowledge. So tell us a little bit more about your other research.
Okay, actually, my PhD dissertation is about the 18th century kingship in Korea. It's not nothing nothing related with the Western learning or the Jesuit translations. But one day I found that in the text of one high bureaucrat's writing, I found that he used a geometrical term as a political term. So I wonder why he used this for the political term. It is not from the Confucianism or Neo-Confucianism, or just not. It is usually in Korea, people they use those terms. When they use those terms, it is only for the mathematic field. So I was wonder. So I from that time I studied Jesuit translations, and now my institute is working on the translations of Jesuits writings. So I'm working on that, and I wrote. I am writing the. How can I say? I'm working on the Jesuit things, and also I'm working on the 19th century's translation in Korea as well, Korea and Japan, or the, how can I say? It is very difficult to talk about my thinking. Well, yeah, what can I say? Recently, I'm working on the Jesuits Shanghai Jesuits publication of Korean 순교자, Korean Catholic martyrs.
Martyrs, yeah.
History of Shanghai Jesuit publication of Korean martyrs. It is very it was very interesting to me because Jesuit, but usually the Catholic in Korea is MEP, which is the 파리외방 종교회. They were enemies. Jesuit and 파리외방 종교회s were enemies, but Jesuit in Shanghai printed the Korean. Actually, they published the Korean martyrs, and with the help of Korean 파리외방 종교회. So I was working on these texts, and then I found that there are so many, not many, but there are some information remained in China, which is related to, which explained the Korean situation in 19th century, which does not exist in Korea. Which means that 19th century's Korean history is not cannot be rebuilt with the only Korean documents, but with the documents in France and China, and those kind of parts of the information we have to put them together and rebuild the 19th century Korea. That is what I found during the working with the Shanghai Jesuit production. It was kind of on, how can I say, very boring work, actually. Yeah.
it doesn't sound very boring to us. So I think, so I don't want to, this was such a wonderful session, and I really hope, we can keep doing these things like this. I think with that, let's give Dr. Soh a round of applause. And before we close off, what I'm going to, all right, well, round of applause. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording for now. But what I'll do is we can hang in for another 5 minutes. If anybody else has we can chat a little bit more informally. And there was another question from an audience member just now. So I'm going to give a chance for that.